Masechet Gittin, Daf Mem He. We're talking about the law that if an owner tries to take his slave and sell him to live outside the land of Israel, then the slave gains his freedom. We also mentioned the opposite law, that if you have an owner and a slave who are living outside the land of Israel, and the Eved Kanaani decides he wants to make aliyah, he has a right to make aliyah, and the master has to allow him to do that. So now we have a story about that. Hahu abda da'arak mechusa la'aris la'aris azal mare abatre. There was a certain slave who went from outside of Eretz Israel, and he went and ran to Israel, and the master followed him to get him back. So they came to the Rabbi Ameh to see what to do. So the Rabbi Ameh says, here's the deal. I will write a promissory note to you that the slave will owe you his value, and you have to write a get shechrur to free him. In other words, this is not the owner deserves compensation. The slave wants to live in Israel, fine, he has a right to do that, but then he's going to owe his own value to the master. So that's the deal. That's the halacha. That's how it works. The slave has a right to live in Israel, and will pay his value back to the master. Ve'ilah, and now the Rabbi Ameh tells the master, and if you don't agree to this deal and don't write a get shechrur, mapakna lach le minach midrabi achai b'Rabbi Yoshia, then we will force you to free your slave, and you won't even get money for it. Then you'll lose out on everything, because that's the law. He has a right to live in Israel if he wants to. Okay, good. Now, this is, we learned this from the opinion of Rabbi Achai, Rabbi Yoshia. What does he say? So we're going to see three interpretations of the following pasuk. The pasuk about lo taskid ayvet. So here's the first one, which is not relevant to us. The one that's going to be relevant to us is the last one of Rabbi Achai. But we're going to bring the whole braita. The Tanya, lo yeshivu barasecha pen yahatiu o techa li. Pasuk in Shemot says that the Canaanites are not allowed to remain in the land of Israel when you go in and take it over, because they will be a negative influence upon you. They are going to influence you to do their avodah zarah. All right, that's what the pasuk says. So now the Midrash asks a good question. What if there's a goy, a Canaanite, who accepts upon himself not to follow idolatry? He says, oh, monotheism, that sounds like a good idea. I'm going to follow you guys. Well, that person will no longer be a negative influence. He doesn't have to actually convert and be totally part of Bnei Israel, but he can be a ger toshav, and there would not be a negative influence. So would this pasuk that says don't allow the Canaanites to live there apply to a good Canaanite? Talmud Omar, lo taskir ayved el adonav asher yinasel alecha ma'im adonav. My takanato immecha yesheb bekirbecha. This is a brilliant metaphorical interpretation of this pasuk. The simple reading of the pasuk is that if there's a slave and he runs away from his master and he comes to you, you're not allowed to return him back to his master, right? He should remain with you, and you take care of him. This pasuk kind of encourages slaves to run away, which might lead to the abandonment of slavery altogether, which is probably what Devarim actually wants to happen. If all slaves all run away and they are harbored by the people that they come to, then that will abolish slavery effectively. This pasuk was not kept in practice, not even in the United States and in the North, when even though the North did not have slavery and the South did, but there was the slave refugee law that said the slave runs from the South to the North. This is in 1850. Then the person in the North has to return them to the South. So even the North did participate in slavery in the South. Okay, so that's the simple reading of this pasuk. But this first explanation in the Braita is reading it metaphorically, that the Adonav here is referring to idolatry. That do not return in Eved is referring to a Canaanite, and in a way, serving idolatry is a form of slavery, because you're under the whim of these gods who are just kind of selfish bureaucrats. And so is not kind of that's what they taught. Idolaters, pagans taught that human beings are created to be slaves to the gods. Okay, so if such a Canaanite who was an idolater previously comes and runs away from his religion and comes to you, do not return him back there, right? He's coming to be saved from his previous masters. Rather, in Mecha Yeshev, let him dwell with you. Meaning, if he is a Canaanite who made teshuvah and now is monotheistic, then he's allowed to remain in the land of Israel, and he won't be a negative influence. Don't force him to go live with idolaters. Make sure he lives with you, and actually you take care of him. Okay, so brilliant reading. But Rabbi Yoshia thinks that doesn't fit the wording of the pasuk so well. Why should it say from his master? If it says from his master, it sounds like it's talking about a slave. If it was talking about a regular Canaanite who is leaving his religion, it should say from his father. The father is the one who teaches the son, this is our pagan religion, and the son, if he realizes that this is nonsense, that his father taught him, and he's leaving what his father taught him, that pagan religion, and coming to you, to monotheism. So it shouldn't say master, it should say father, if that's what you meant. But it doesn't, it says master, and therefore we have now a second interpretation. El amar Rabbi Yoshia, b'mocher avdo lehosara ala ares hakatuv medaber. Rather, Rabbi Yoshia says this is referring to someone who sells his slave from Israel to outside of Israel, right? A Jew who has an Eved Kanaani, and now is going outside the land of Israel, so he should not remain outside of Israel. Rather, we, the Bet Din, we have to make sure that we make sure he comes back to live in Israel. Don't return him to his master. So now here, master makes sense. Who is coming to be delivered, who is escaping to you from his master. Okay, so that's the law of our Mishnah, that a slave cannot be forced to move from Israel outside the land of Israel. That's the second interpretation. But there's also, as a challenge, Kashya le Rabbi Ahai b'Rabbi Yoshia. This is the one that we're going to need. And he says, Hai asher yinnasel elecha, asher yinnasel ma'imach miba'eleh. He says, your interpretation, Yoshia, also doesn't fit with the words, because it says that he escapes to you. Not, according to your interpretation, it should be that he escapes from you, right? Because you, Rabbi Yoshia says, assuming that the Bet Din, the community is in Israel, and if it means that he has escaped from Israel and has left Israel, according to the Yoshia's interpretation, right, because he left Israel and now he's coming to find solace and wants to return, so let him remain with you. So it doesn't make sense if it says he comes. It should have, according to you, it should have said he left you because he was forced to go from Israel outside the land of Israel. But the pasuk doesn't say that. It says that he comes to you. So therefore, Rabbi Ahai interprets it in the opposite direction. Rather, pasuk is talking about an Eved Kanaani who's owned by a Jew outside the land of Israel, and he decides, right, now that he's Eved Kanaani, he's chayav in many of the mitzvot, and he learns about the mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, and he wants to fulfill all the other mitzvot that apply in Eretz Yisrael, and so he runs away, and now it makes sense. Asher yinasel elecha, he runs to you, meaning to you, the Bet Din in Israel, and he says, please help me out. So the pasuk says, don't return him back to his master, and master also makes sense literally. don't return him to his master outside of Israel. Rather, he can remain with you and live in the land of Israel. And so this is the third interpretation, and that's the one that Rabbi Ameh had in mind and was quoting when he told this master, "Hey, listen, you better free him, and we'll give you we'll give you a receipt for a loan that to be paid back." For the value, and if not, then we'll just force him to be free, and you'll lose out on your money as well, because we have this interpretation of Rabbi Achai that learns it from this pasuk. Okay, of the three interpretations, the first one is the most metaphorical, referring to any Canaanite, any non-Jew who comes to you. They're not actually slaves, but rather spiritual slaves to paganism, but are coming to you for safe harbor now that they are monotheists. Yes, they should remain with you. Ger Toshav is allowed to, should be encouraged to live in Israel and be protected. Most Peshat reading of these three is the last one. Okay. Tanya idach, but now we have another braita that says a different interpretation. Lo taskir eved el adonav. Rabbi Omer belokeach eved al menat l'shachrero hakatub medaber. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says this is referring to someone who buys a slave on condition that he will free him. And hechidami, what would be a language that you would say like that? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak tekatev lehachi leshe'ekachacha harei atzmecha kanu lecha me'achshav. He says, listen, I'm going to buy this slave. When I buy you, you will acquire your freedom retroactively from now. That's what he writes to the slave. And so then when the transaction happens and the buyer buys the slave from the current master, then immediately and retroactively goes free. So the problem is that someone might make this deal, say this language, and then, out of goodness of their heart, they want to free this person. But then after a while, maybe they'll change their mind. And when it actually comes to pay, this is, I'm paying all this money. Look, I'm going to pay $10,000 for this slave. You know what? I think I want to keep him for a while. So you might change your mind and decide to keep him. That's what Rabbi says. The pasuk is teaching. Do not return a slave to slavery. Rather, let him live with you as a free person. That's what you promised him. Okay, this type of a language and institution, this law, also we find in Roman law that they had something like this, that you'd be able to buy a slave for his own freedom. Good. Rav Chisda arak le'avda lebe kuta'eh shalach lehu hadru nihali. We have a very interesting story about Rav Chisda. He's a rabbi in Bavel. He's the Rosh Yeshiva of Sura, and he owned a slave. The slave ran away to the Samaritan village. This is a Samaritan village also in Bavel. Shalach lehu hadru nihali. Rav Chisda sends a message to the Samaritans and says, please return my slave to me. It's my property. Return it to me. Shalchu le lo taskir ibed el adonav. Now the Samaritans, they know their Chumash. They believe in the Chumash, not in the Nevi'im Ketuvim, and certainly not in the oral law. But the Chumash they interpret as more literally, and they keep very strictly according to their interpretation. So the simple reading of this pasuk is: when you have a slave that runs away, the pasuk doesn't say where and when or how. It doesn't matter. Any slave that runs away, you cannot return to them. You do not return to the master. You help the slave and harbor him. So they said, sorry, we're not returning the slave. It says in the pasuk not to return him. Shalach lehu v'chen ta'aseh l'chamoro v'chen ta'aseh l'simlato v'chen ta'aseh l'chol abedat achicha. Rav Chisda returns back. Okay, you're giving me a pasuk. I'll give you a pasuk too. The pasuk says that you have to return lost items. You have to do that for a person's animal, for a person's clothing, for anything that you find, anything, any property. This slave belongs to me. He ran away, so return my lost item. Okay, so here's another pasuk. So they've sent back shalachu le v'ketib lo taskir ibed el adonav. They send back the same pasuk. Yeah, okay, the returning a lost item applies to other things, animals, ear pods, wallets. Yes, you have to return, but a slave Pasuk says specifically, you do not return. So no, we are not returning him. So Rav Chisda sends back, Shalach lehu hahu be'ayvet shebarach michusa la'adis la'adis. Uchtu Rabbi Achai be'Rabbi Yoshia. Rav Chisda says, no, I interpret that according to the third interpretation of Rabbi Achai. That's only referring to a slave that runs from outside of the land of Israel to Israel. Then you say, this Eved Kanani, he has a right to make aliyah, and you don't return him. But if it's within Bavel, which is the case here, it's from one place outside of Israel to another place outside of Israel, then it does not apply. This is a difference of interpretation. The Samaritans didn't have the oral laws, so they would not, presumably, they would not agree with Rabbi Achai's interpretation, but they went with the Peshat interpretation. It doesn't say what happened at the end of the story. I'm guessing the Samaritans probably weren't convinced by this. And now we just ask a question about Rav Chisda. How come he sent them back the third interpretation? Why didn't he send back one or the first two interpretations, which also would like the first one that's talking about Canaanites, or the second one that's someone that went from Israel to outside the land of Israel. In any case, or the fourth one, the Rabbi, when you buy a slave on condition of freeing him. Right, he could have quoted any of them, and the answer is Mishum de Mashma Lehu Kera'eh. This is because that would be the most understandable to the Samaritans. The Samaritans, because they like the Peshat, of all the four interpretations here, that one is the closest to Peshat of not returning. But the truth is that even that one has a level of derash because it's limiting it only to someone who goes from who runs away from outside to the land of Israel. So not sure if the Samaritans would even agree with that one, but anyway, he sent them the one that's the most Peshat. Yet one more story about a lost item and the Samaritans. Abaye lost a donkey, and it was found made its way to the Samaritan village and was found there. Shalach lehu shedaru hali. So Abaye sent them a message. Says, "Oh, you found my donkey. Please return it to me." Shalchu le shalach simana. They said, "Well, send a sign, send a distinguishing mark, so that we know that you are the owner." This is for halacha also. You have to verify that this is the owner, that the one claiming it really belongs to him. Shalach lehu dechivara kereseh. Oh, his belly is white. Okay, the donkey's belly is white. Shalahu le ilav de nachmani at lahava meshadar nale nihalach atu kule hamare lav keresaihu chiverininhu. And so a Samaritan sent back, if not that you were Nachman, Abaye's real name was Nachman, and if not that you were such a great sage, then we would not have returned it to you, because the bellies of all the donkeys are white. Here's some pictures of some donkeys with light-colored bellies. Not this one, not all of them, but it's not really a distinguishing mark. This is very, very common. So he says, really, the truth is that we're just trusting you because you are a great sage. So I think this speaks well of the Samaritans, that they have a good relationship with the rabbi, and well, it's good to double check always for anyone. You have to follow the law and ask for a distinguishing mark. You can't just return things to random people. But they trusted Abaye and returned it to him, and so it's very interesting to see the relationship between the rabbis and the Samaritans. And the Samaritans seems to be good Samaritans here, and have respect for the sage. And interesting in the previous story how the rabbis were aware of the Samaritan interpretation and aware of the gap between Peshat and Midrash. And so, at least when they're conversing with Samaritans, they know how to choose the one that is the most simple according to the Peshat. Okay, that brings us to the next Mishnah. En podin et hashivuyin yater al kedeh demehen mipnei tikun ha'olam. The Mishnah teaches that the community is not allowed to pay too much to redeem captors. You can't pay more than the actual value. If it's talking about a slave, it will be the value of a slave, but it could be talking about anyone. And so there should be a set standard value. Why? For the betterment of the world. So this is continuing the list of things that are Mipnei Tikkun Ha'olam, and the Gemara will explain why. This is a policy today that, unfortunately, Israel has to deal with when Israeli soldiers get captured, and how much should they trade for them. America has to deal with it. Back when Nixon was president, he had serious situations of American diplomats getting captured, now with Russia taking U.S. citizens and so on. And so you never want to pay too much, because then that will encourage these terrorists or enemies to kidnap more people. And so this is a big problem, and therefore there should be a fixed amount so that it will not encourage things to be worse in the future. It could be good for this particular person that we really care about, and we want to save them. On the other hand, by paying an exorbitant amount for this one person and saving them, we're causing more problems in the future. Okay, that's one law. Second, ve'en mavrichin et hashivuyin mipnei tikkun ha'olam. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer mipnei takanat hashivuyim. Also, we should not, if someone is taken captive already, we should not help them escape. Now, it seems like it would be a good thing to help people escape. The problem is that if I guess the assumption is that there's always these thugs and mafia people that are using doing human trafficking, and the problem is, if we one time help some people escape, then in the future the captors will tie them up, put them in more high security and worse situations. They're not going to stop taking captives, but they'll continue, and then they will treat them even worse and have them bound hands and feet the whole time. Yerushalmi says that interpretation. And so therefore, better for the captives themselves, even though it will help a few captives if you help them escape one time, nevertheless, better for in overall to not help them escape, but rather pay a certain limited amount, and then we'll kind of it gives tolerate it to some degree, but that overall that will lessen the incentive for people to take captives, and it will also mean that the captives will be treated not so badly. That's Tikkun Ha'olam. Rashbag agrees with the law that you should not help people escape. However, he says, no, it's because of the betterment of the captives themselves, meaning the other captives. If there's 10 people taken captive, and we go and help 3 of them to escape, then the other 7 will be avenged, right? The captain says, 3 people escaped, I'm going to take it out on you, like a lot of countries do. Like in Syria, when some Jews wanted to escape, if they would run away, or if they were allowed to leave and didn't come back, then they would go and the Syrian government would torture their family. And so we should not help people escape, because we have to worry about those that are still in captivity. Okay, very important Mishnah. Gemara, Ibaya lehu. Hai mipnei tikkun ha'olam, mishum do haka desiborahu, o dilma mishum dela legarbu velaitu tefeh. When it says that you should not pay more than the value of a person to redeem them, because of the betterment of the world, what exactly are we concerned about? One opinion is because of the financial pressure of the community, right? If we're going to give in to paying $1 million, $10 million, then the community has to come up with that money. It's a lot of financial pressure. It's too much. Or is it because it's going to encourage the captors to go and kidnap more people? Says, look, last time we got $1 million. You know what? Let's get a few more. We'll get more and more. Is that the reason? Now, there is a nafkamina, which is in the next story. Tashema de Levi bar darga parka librate bitlesad alfe dinare zahav. This man, not a rabbi, named Levi bar darga, his daughter was taken captive, and he was rich, so he paid from his own funds 13,000 golden dinar. So you see, if a person's rich and wants to pay more, then that's fine. So according to this, we're not concerned that with the future that they're going to take captive more, they're going to kidnap more people. We're only concerned about the pressure on the community. So that only applies if the community has to raise money. But if a person himself is rich and wants to pay more, so then they can pay more, and it doesn't put financial burden on the community. This is all very relevant today as well. America has policies and other countries have policies that the government will not pay a certain amount. But what if there's some rich person and they want to pay, right? So then does the government even allow that rich person to pay? Or not, will depend on this. So okay, so we see from this story of Levi that it's not because we're not worried about the future kidnapping, but only because of the pressure of the community. Abaye says, wait a second, you're learning from that story? Who says that Levi bar Darga did the right thing? Who says that he was acting in accordance with the wishes of the sages? Maybe he did it against the wishes of the sages. If they asked the sages, they said, no, even though it's your own money, you cannot pay an exorbitant amount for your own daughter. Sorry, your daughter is very wonderful, but there's going to be a bigger problem if we do that, because then they're going to encourage them to go and capture more and more and more people. And that will be worse for the entire community. So if you ask the rabbis, they may have said actually that he should not do this. But he did it anyway against the wishes of the community. Okay, so we have, it's very interesting. You have a law and reasons for it, a story that tests out the law, tests out the reasons, and then a comment on that story. And this really shows the tension. It's a very difficult tension that families and governments have to go through in order to set policy and to stop people from kidnapping, but at the same time, each person is of infinite value, and so how to weigh the tension between those two ideals. Okay, ואין מבריחין את השבויים מפני תיקון העולם. רבן שמעון גמליאל אומר מפני תיקון השבויים. מה בעיניהו? איכא בעיניהו דלקה אל אחד. The next part of the Mishnah said that we don't help people escape because we want to make sure that in general captors will not bind the victims too badly, too harshly. In the future. Whereas Rashbag says, no, we're worried about the other captives that are currently there. What would be a practical difference between them? It would be if he was the only one. There's only one captive person, and so we can help him escape. According to Rashbag, you should help him escape because there's nobody left behind, right? If you have the last Jew in Syria and you're helping them escape, then go ahead, help the Jew escape. They can't retaliate. There's nobody else there. But if you're worried about the first opinion, for Tikkun Ha'olam, the captives in the future are going to take other people captive, we assume, unfortunately, but that's the reality. And so if we kind of make a somewhat of a deal with the devil that, listen, we won't help them escape, but you let them just, live in a closed room, but don't bind them hand and foot and torture them. And instead, we won't help them escape, and we'll pay a reasonable amount to redeem them. Okay, and now a very, very interesting but difficult story. Benated Rav Nachman Bahashan Kidra Bidaihu. Rav Nachman, we already actually saw Rav Nachman in the previous sugya. He was the Rosh Yeshiva in Nehar De'ah. He was also close to the exilarch, the rich family that was in charge of all the Jews in Bavel. Now his daughters, they were able to stir a pot with their bare hands, and they wouldn't get burnt. Now what does that mean? Seems that they were so righteous that they were saved from burning. This appears in other stories as well, that someone who's righteous, like the righteous woman who was helping the poor, was able to stand on the floor of an oven and her feet didn't get burnt, in a different story. Okay, Kashya le Rav Eilish. Now there's another rabbi who lived there, Rav Eilish, and he heard about this and he was confused and bothered by it. Ketiv adam echad me'elef masati v'isha bechol ele lo masati. A pasuk in Kohelet says, I found only 1 in 1,000 men are righteous, and regarding women, even 1 in 1,000, I could not find anyone righteous. Haika benated Rav Nachman. Rav Elish says, oh, but what about the daughters of Rav Nachman? It seems that they're righteous because look how they don't get burned. And so Rav Elish is all confused. How could it be that there are righteous women when the pasuk says that there are no righteous women? Okay, now, so you see Rav Elish does not have a very favorable attitude towards women in general, and so he's suspicious of these daughters of Rav Nachman. Anyway, because of that, because of this kind of suspicion, or you can call it evil eye, but but not in a magical way. I don't know. Maybe the story does mean it in a magical way. I don't generally think so. But who knows? Anyway, because he is like wondering about them. Oh, are you really so righteous? So now they're going to be tested. And so, because of that, these women are taken captive, and Rav Elish also is taken captive along with them. Okay, so now they're all in captivity. Yom Ahad havayatev gabeahu gabrad havayade belishna desipore. And so Rav Elish is sitting there in prison, and a certain person who knows how to speak the language of birds was with Rav Elish. Ata urba v'kakarile amar le maika amar. Now, as they were sitting, a raven came and was calling to Rav Elish, and some, just saying making some bird noises. So Rav Elish asks the birdman, what is the raven saying? Amar le Elish berach. The bird is saying, Elish, escape. This is a good time, right? You won't be caught. Amar urba shikrahu velasamichna ale. So Rav Elish apparently accepted the interpretation of the bird interpreter, but said, I'm not going to trust a raven. All right, ravens lie. Oh, how does he know ravens lie? I don't know, maybe because in Yonah, he sent a raven first, and he didn't get an answer from the raven. The raven didn't fulfill his mission and come back. And so, raven, I'm not trusting a raven. And so I'm not taking a risk and trying to escape, right? They'll kill me if I try to escape. And it doesn't work. So a few minutes later, Yonah, a dove, comes and is calling, making some bird noises, and he asks Mr. Bird Interpreter, what is he saying? Okay, not too hard to figure out this time. He's saying, Elish, time to run away. You can escape now. Amar Knesset Yisrael ke Yonah mitila shma minra mitrachesh li nisa. Rav Elish said, this time I believe this bird, because the Jewish people is compared to a Yonah, ke Yonah bechagvei asela and shir hashirim. Or a few times it compares Bnei Israel to a Yonah, and so this is good. And the Yonah also regarding Noach, right, does come back and is a good messenger. The Yonah brings back an olive branch, and then Noach knows, okay, now I can leave this teva in which he was in prison for so long. It's safe to leave. It's safe to escape. So based on that, he said, okay, now I understand. This is a true message, and a miracle will happen to me, and I will be able to escape successfully. Good. Amar ezil echeze benated Rav Nachman ikaiman behe manutaihu ahadrinhu. He says, okay, before I leave, let me go and check on the daughters of Rav Nachman, who were also captives together with him, and let's see if they remain steadfast in their faith. Then I will bring them with me and return them home, because I know I'm going to escape. So if they come with me, presumably they will successfully escape too, but only if they're deserving. Rav Elish says, which is very interesting. What do you mean only if they're deserving? So let's see. Amar nashe kol miledit lehu sadran lehadade bebet hakiseh. How am I going to know if these women kept their faith? Probably meaning if they kept their chastity, or if they allowed themselves or gave themselves over to their captives. So he says, how am I going to know? I know. Women, all their secrets, they tell each other in the bathroom. So shama'inhu de kamran. So he goes and eavesdrops in the bathroom. Okay, this is a very strange scene. What does this say about Rav Elish? Doesn't seem so savory. to go there eavesdropping in their bathroom. Anyway, he hears the woman saying, "Adi gubrin unaharde'e gubrin lema lehulish buyayihu delir hakin hu mehacha delale tu inashen velishma'e veli farkinan." So the women the captive woman, the daughters of Rav Nachman, were saying to each other, "Adi, these people are men, and then the people of Naharde'ah are men," meaning our captives are men, and the people back home are men. So what's the difference between them? Let us tell our captives that they should bring us far away from here, right? Keep us farther and take us farther away, so that men will not come here that we have been taken captive and redeem us. So Rav Elish understands these words as these women. It does not clear if they're married or not. Let's say they are. Back home. These women are married back home, but now they're taken by their captives, and they actually like their captives better, and they freely gave themselves over to their captives, and they're even going to tell their captives, "Hey, take us far away from home, because we like you better than our husbands back home." So you see that they are willingly giving themselves over, committing adultery, perhaps if they are in fact married, meaning that they are not faithful, they are not righteous. And so Rav Elish decides not to redeem them, not to help them escape. He leaves them there. Kam adak ataihu ve'ahu gabra ledidet recheshnisa avar b'mabara ve'ahu gabra ashkahu uktalu. So Rav Elish goes and escapes. The bird interpreter also goes with him. And a miracle happened for Rav Elish, and he was able to cross a river on a ferry. But that guy, the bird interpreter, the captors found him and they killed him. I guess he didn't have the merit to escape. He was the bird interpreter. He should have known better, because the birds only said Elish escape. They didn't say you also escape. This guy, bird interpreter, he's an interesting fellow, because he seems to be like a kind of magician. This is not a standard way of divining, or it is a standard way of divining, but would probably not be permitted by the Torah. You see, Rav Elish, he doesn't actually rely on the bird interpreter, but he uses pisukim to figure out, what does the orev mean? What is the symbolism of the Yonah? And so he uses Torah interpretation rather than magic interpretation. So that shows a difference between the bird interpreter and Rav Elish, and maybe that's why Rav Elish had a miracle happen to him, but the magic guy did not. Ki hadran ve'atan amar havu ka bachshan kidra bichshafim. Now, eventually, Rav Nachman's daughters were returned, and when they came back, Rav Elish said about them, I see that they can. The fact that they were able to stir the pots with their hands is not because they were righteous, but rather because they were witches. And through witchcraft, they were able to protect their hands. So you see that there's a theme of true Torah and righteousness versus witchcraft. With the birdman being using magic, and according to Rav Elish, these women who use magic, but really they are not righteous according to Rav Elish. So if we take this, as this has been a lot of interpretations to this story, but I don't think that any of the interpretations that I've seen really do justice to the story. Basically, the most interpretations, except Rav Elish's evaluation of the women, that they were magicians, witches, and not faithful to their husbands, and not worthy of being redeemed, and therefore Rav Elish was right in not redeeming them. This shows Rav Nachman in kind of a bad light. Rav Nachman, the great Amorah, and his daughters are so such negative characters. It kind of reflects badly on Rav Nachman, and they would tell such a story. Anyway, that is a standard interpretation. However, I'd like to suggest an opposite interpretation of this story, which is that Rav Elish was in the wrong for not redeeming them. I don't think this is a wild interpretation. We just had a story where it says someone did something, but they were in the wrong. The rabbis were not acceptable of it. it. And here you have these women who are taken captive, right? Would it cross anybody's mind that you should do a righteousness test before you redeem them? They're in a very difficult situation, all right? Why would you assume that they want to be unfaithful when they are being captured and who knows, tortured or being threatened to be tortured? So it's difficult to judge people. We see that Elish from the beginning of the story already doesn't think that there can possibly be such a thing as a righteous woman. So he already has a negative, seeking their negative report to begin with, and so therefore he interprets their actions and their words negatively. However, if you look at their words, actually, it's not so clear that they were negative. They could have been making the best of a terrible situation, assuming that they're not going to be taken captive. Basically, they're saying, listen, we have husbands at home, or men at home that we will marry if they weren't married yet. And so these guys are men. It doesn't say who the captors were. They might have been Jewish captors. So it's okay, what's the difference? Either we'll marry men at home or we'll marry people here. And so, right, we'll make the best of it either way. I think this might reflect actually how they were being treated by their husbands or future husbands back home. That was kind of being in captivity anyway. So this is okay, what's the difference? The way we're treated, especially if they had an attitude like Rav Elish that assumed that they could not be righteous. So it's okay, whatever, we'll marry these guys who captured us, and we'll live with them. What's the difference? And maybe they didn't want to impose themselves to be a burden on the community, that the community is now going to have to go and raise money and redeem them. And so he says, okay, we'll continue this new life, as sad as it is, but we'll make the best of it. And now, so we'll marry these guys. And what's the difference? Let's not be a burden on our community. To add to that, what would happen to them if when they are eventually redeemed, or somehow they get back? What happens when they do get back? Let's say they were married. What's going to be how are they going to be treated now? Right? Are their original husbands? Are they going to take them back? If they're Kohanim, they're not allowed to take them back, so they can't even go back to the original husbands. Or if they're not Kohanim, then the original husbands might be disgusted with them and say, "Oh, listen, what did you do over there? What happened to you?" Or if they're not married yet, then are they going to be able to get married? And now that they've been violated by these captors, and so they might be saying in the bathroom, you know what? Then now that we're taken captive, let's not be redeemed, and because we're not going to have a good life back home anyway. Well, we can have an equal or better life in going forward. And maybe they were just saying this to cheer themselves up. To make the best of a bad situation, but it doesn't mean that they really were evil people or that they were witches. I think Rav Elish's evaluation of them was actually negative, and I think the story altogether is actually coming to criticize Rav Elish for not working harder to help them escape. Okay, anyway, that's what I'm offering, and I have a proof from the next sugya, which has a very similar structure. It also is going to talk about a law and then the story of a rabbi who should have worked harder to redeem the tefillin. Okay, so now we come to the next Mishnah. Ve'en lochin sefarim tefillin mezuzot min hagoyim yoter al kedei demehen mipnei tikun ha'olam. If some thieves go and steal a sefer Torah or tefillin or mezuzot, and now they're going to sell them to be redeemed. So this is a great mitzvah to redeem a sefer Torah. People do it today. There's a lot of sefer Torah that are left back in Syria and other countries, and so communities will raise money to redeem them. But same thing here, you should not pay too much, because then that's going to encourage thieves to go and steal more Sifrei Torah, Tefillin and Mezuzot, and it's going to be the end is going to just be worse, right? Better to not redeem one Sefer Torah, meaning not overpay one Sefer Torah, so that there will not be an incentive for more Sifrei Torah to be taken. Okay, this is also unfortunately practical today because recently some Sifrei Torah were in fact redeemed, and the negotiations have to be done very carefully so that the thieves don't think that there's some rich people that will pay anything for them, and then they will that will make the future worse. All right, Amar le Rav Burdiya le Rav Ashe, Yater al kede demehen hu de enlochin habichde demehen lochin. So Rav Burdiya tells Rav Ashe, that explains that the Mishnah only says you can't pay more than their value, but their own value, yes, you can pay. You should pay something. You should try to get them back. Shema mineh sefer Torah shenimsa biyad goy korin bo Dilma lignoz. So here's the question: does this mean that a Sefer Torah that was found in the hands of a non-Jew, that you can read it? Because we're going to see in a second, there's a big machloket about this, but some opinions say that if it was from a non-Jew, how do you know? Maybe the non-Jew wrote it. If a non-Jew writes the Sefer Torah, according to most opinions, it is not valid, and so you can't use it. Now, why would you bother redeeming it and paying? Okay, don't pay more, but you pay its value to redeem it. So doesn't that mean that you actually would use it and read from it? So is that true? Because not everybody agrees to that. So we say, okay, maybe not. Maybe you're going to redeem it to put it away. Lignoz, you put it in geniza, and nowadays we would bury it, but that doesn't actually mean that you have to bury it. You could just put it in a closet, put it away so that it won't be used for regular reading. But because it may not be kosher. Okay, so it means we're going to redeem it because who knows? Maybe it is in fact holy, so we don't want it to be in foreign hands. But it doesn't mean that we're going to read it. Rather, we're going to put it away. Amar Rav Nachman, Naktinan Sefer Torah sheketavo min yisaref ketavo goy yiganez. So Rav Nachman now is going to bring this halacha of what is the status of different Sifrei Torah. If a Sefer Torah is written by a heretic, it should be burnt. This is a good question I have about the Dead Sea Scrolls, because the Dead Sea sect, according to the Pharisees and rabbis, they are heretics, and therefore the scrolls that are, some of them are Sifrei Torah, should be burnt. All right. Well, anyway, we're not going to use it as a kosher Sefer Torah in the Bet Knesset, but I hope nobody will burn them. But anyway, Ketavo Goy, if a non-Jew writes it, a non-Jew who's not a heretic, right? A heretic is a Jew who's a heretic is worse than a non-Jew. If a non-Jew writes it, then it should just be put away. But not used, but we don't have to burn it. Nimsa biyad min yiganez, nimsa biyad goy. Amri la yiganez amri la korin bo. Now, we don't know who wrote it, but if it's found in the hands of a heretic, but maybe the heretic didn't write it, maybe the heretic got it from a Jew. So there we don't know. Therefore, we're not going to burn it. We're also not going to use it. So instead, we'll put it away. If it's found in the hands of a non-Jew, so then some say it should also be put away, and that was our conclusion up here. But some say actually you can read it. Right, it wasn't in the hands of a mean; it was in the hands of a non-Jew. So most likely a Jew read it, or we're going to see an opinion that says actually, even if a non-Jew wrote it, it might be kosher. Okay, so now let's see the different Tanaim what they say. Sefer Torah sheketavo goy Tana hada yisaref Tanya idach yiganez v'Tanya idach korin bo. A Sefer Torah was written by a non-Jew. We actually have three different opinions about that. One Baraita says it should be burned. One Baraita says it should be put away. One Baraita says you can read it. How can we resolve these three different baraitot? La kashya hadetanya yisaref Rabbi Eliezer hida mar stam machshevet goy la'avodah zara. The most stringent opinion that says you have to burn it, that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says that the unspecified intention of a non-Jew is for idol worship, right? Stam goy. Some goyim are monotheists, some are okay, but just standard, if we don't know otherwise, we should assume that they are idolaters, and therefore that's the same as a mean. You have to burn it. The one that says the non-Jew that writes Sefer Torah you have to put away. That's the opinion of the following Tana. Rav Hamnuna taught this in the son of Rava of Parshonya. He's taught the following: Sefer Torah, Tefillin, Umezuzot shekatavan min umasur, Goy ve'aved, Isha ve'katan, Kuti ve'Yisrael mumar, פסולין, שנאמר וקשרתם וכתבתם, כל שישנו בקשירה, ישנו בכתיבה, וכל שאינו בקשירה, אינו בכתיבה. So a Sefer Torah, Tefillin, or Mezuzot that was written by any of the following: a heretic, or an informer, right? Someone who informs against the Jewish community to an evil government, or a non-Jew, or Eved. Non-Jew is very, the mean is actually very interesting here. And you can see in the printed editions, the Maharshal suggests erasing the word mean, because it goes against the other teachings that we just saw, that a mean you have to burn it. But in this version, this baraita, you only have to put it away. You don't have to burn it. So he suggested erasing the word mean. But actually, if you look at the manuscripts, you'll see that the manuscripts all have the word mean. Right? See mean in the printed editions in parentheses. Maharshal tried to take it out, but it is found in all of the manuscripts except that one that has goy. But otherwise, you see it does belong there. So in this, according to this, a mean. A Sefer Torah written by a mean, you put it away but don't have to burn. Okay, a non-Jew, or a slave, a woman, or a child, or any of these who write it, or a Samaritan, or a Jew who is rebellious and against observance. All these pisulin, in all these cases, the Sefer Torah is no good, not usable. Tefillin mezuzot, not usable. Why? Because it says you should bind them and you should write them. The ukshatam, uchtavtam, referring to tefillin and mezuzot. And so we learn from this: anyone who is obligated in binding tefillin is able to write any of these, whereas someone who does not bind tefillin may not write it. So that explains everyone on the list, including women and children. There's nothing wrong with them. They have full belief and faith, and could be very righteous. Not like what Elish says, right? But they could be very righteous. Nevertheless, they're not commanded in tefillin, and therefore they cannot write tefillin. Same thing with all the others. If they're not Jewish, they certainly have no obligation to write. And even Yisrael Mumar, who should be writing, but he does be wearing tefillin, but he doesn't. So that's the law. One has to be involved in the mitzvah and obligated in the mitzvah in order to write the object also. Okay, v'had Tanya korin bo hay tanahu. Now the third opinion that said something written by a non-Jew can be used, Sefer Torah can be used, written by a non-Jew, the Tanya. Lokhin sefarim min hagoyim bechol makom, uvad shehu ketuvim kehilchatan, says one can purchase a Sefer Torah from a non-Jew anywhere, as long as they were written halachically according to all the standards. Maaseh begoy echad b'Seidan she'ha kotev sefarim ve'etir Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel lekach mimenu. And this is not just theoretical; it was practical. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel permitted people to buy the Sifrei Torah from a certain non-Jew who lived in Seidan, and he was a scribe. And he wrote Sifrei Torah. And Rashba'ag says, yes, that's fine, you can use them. Now we have a question, because Rashba'ag is actually very machmir when it comes to the preparation of the parchment, that the parchment has to be done lishma, for the sake of the mitzvah. For this has to be for tefillin, for mezuzah. So he says the parchment has to be prepared for it, but the writing doesn't have to be prepared for it, because if a non-Jew is doing it, then he can't have in mind that this will be lishma, for the sake of a mitzvah, when he's not involved in the mitzvah. Now, how do we know that Rashbag is the one that was machmir regarding the parchment, that you have to prepare the parchment also lishma? Tetanya sipan zahav o shetala alehen or be'emat temea pesulot or be'emat tehora kesherot v'afa pi shelo ibedan lishman. because we have here a braita. The Tanakama is more lenient. And here it says, if you coated the tefillin with gold, you want to make them beautiful and nice, and so instead of black, you make them gold. That's not good. Shouldn't do that. Or if they need patching up and you patch them with the skin of a non-kosher animal, then no good. The tefillin are not kosher. However, if you use kosher skin of a kosher animal, then that's fine, even if it was not tanned lishman. You could just take regular parchment, leather from a kosher animal and use that to repair tefillin. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, afilu or behema tehora pesulot ad sheya'abeden lishman. He says, no, even if it's a kosher animal, it's still no good unless you prepare it lishma. So, according to Rashbag, the parchment has to be done lishma. And so, Rashbag, who's machmir on this, is he going to be so mekel that the writing doesn't have to be lishma? Right? So, we're very surprised that he would allow a non-Jew to write a Sefer Torah. And therefore, we reinterpret his words. Amar Rabba bar Shemuel, beger shehazar lesuro. No, we're talking about actually someone who was not Jewish, but converted to Judaism. And so, he's actually a Jew, but then he went back to his previous ways and is continuing to practice, idolatry or whatever non-Jewish ways there were. So therefore, halachically, this is an important halacha, that anyone who converts to Judaism, if he converts properly, then that person is a Jew forever, no matter what. Even if they go back to pagan ways, they're still a Jew. And therefore, we're talking about that kind of person who wrote the Sefer Torah. If it was really not Jewish, then even Rashbag would say no good, but a Jewish convert, who goes back to his old ways, is still Jewish, and that's what Rashbag says is okay. We ask about this. L'suro, kol sheken davar lemin. Wait, if he went back to his pagan ways, then he's a heretic. So then the Sefer Torah also will not be usable. Amar Rav Asher shechozer l'suro mishum yirah. No, we're talking about a case where he goes back to his pagan ways because of fear that there's some government or people that will harm him or kill him if he practices Judaism. So he did convert to Judaism, but only is practicing paganism out of fear. So he's not a real mean, and he is actually halachically Jewish, and therefore his Sifrei Torah would be permitted, according to Rashbag. Good. Tano Rabbanan, Malin bidmehen ad kede terapik, my terapik, Mar Rav Sheshat Istira. A Braita says you can pay a little bit more than the value of a Sefer Torah if you're redeeming it. How much more? A trapik more. Okay. This is a smaller amount that will, on the one hand, incentivize the thief to give it back. Maybe he wants to make a little extra tip, more than the market value, but it's not so much more that will encourage him to go ahead and steal many more Sifrei Torah. How much is trapik? It's an istira. And now we end with a story. Hahu taya'a. Da'aite haita detfile lekame de'abaye. Amar la yahabt li resh bitmare. Betamre. So there was a certain Arab woman who brought a sack full of tefillin to Abaye. Where'd she get the sack full of tefillin? Who knows? She stole it, she found it, she got it from other people who stole it. Anyway, she's bringing it to Abaye to offer it to Abaye to redeem these tefillin. And so Abaye says, okay, will you give me one resh, a pair of tefillin for one date? Right? Not a date out, but rather a date that you eat. And so I'll give you one little date for each pair of tefillin. This is not very much. Imalya zihara shakla shedatinhu benahara. So she got very angry. That's all you're going to give me, one date for this? Okay, you know what? I'd rather take these tefillin and throw them into the river. I'd rather just destroy them than be insulted by your sorry offer for a box full of dates. For all this tefillin. And she did. She threw all the tefillin into the river. Amar la'i ba'eli lezelzulin hu ba'apa kulehai. And so Abaye then felt bad about what he did. He was remorseful. He says, I should not have denigrated mizalzel the tefillin in front of her so much. I treated them like nothing. Oh, what tefillin? What's it worth? I'll just give a date. Rather, he should have paid the correct amount for them, or even a little bit more, right? He should have paid tedapik more, even more than their value. So this is very important because now it's another story that is attenuating the law of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said don't pay an exorbitant amount, but this is now the other side. Don't pay too little either, right? Because if you offer to pay too little and refuse, then you won't be able to get them back at all. And see, look how all these tefillin now were destroyed because Abaye was not paying enough for them. So here we have a very interesting parallel between the structure of the previous sugya and this one. In the previous sugya, I was talking about redeeming human lives, and there it said, okay, don't pay too much. And then we had a story of a Rabbi Elish, who denigrated the value of the captives and said, "Oh, these captives, these women, they're not worthy of being redeemed." And I interpret that to be a negative story, that he should have worked harder. And my proof is that in the next sugya also we have laws about don't pay too much for Sifrei Torah and Tefillin, and the story and the discussion ends with yet another story about another rabbi who did not pay sufficient attention and denigrated the things that were taken captive, and therefore did not do enough to redeem them. So they both have the same structure, and I think the parallel between the two supports that interpretation of the Rabbi Elish story, that he should have been kinder and been done lechaf zechut and done whatever he could to help those women become free. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.